So we're really delighted that tonight Helle from Ipsos Mori is able to tell us a little bit about what she does. Ipsos Mori, as I'm sure you're all aware, is a big kind of French, actually, kind of multinational marketing firm. And Helle is a cultural anthropologist who's been running global research projects for the past 6 years at Ipsos, and more precisely, their sort of Ethnography Centre of Excellence. So she really heads up a team of people who are using ethnography in a very professional context, and kind of really creating sort of an applied sense of ethnography. So Helle's conducted fieldwork in China, Ethiopia, India, South Korea, also the UK. And she runs the Cultural Insight Network, which basically works with academics across the world to provide rich kind of cultural insights to businesses. She's originally from Denmark, and she provides, pardon my pronunciation here, hygge to the team. Probably got that really badly.
Oh, that was really good.
And she'll be also joined by a couple of her colleagues, Deana and Sophie. So I've already said more than enough. It's great to see so many people here tonight in our kind of crazy offline Zoom world. So I'll just hand over to Helle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for coming. I think that Alex originally told me there was going to be about 15 people on this this little cozy seminar. So I'm quite surprised to see how many that we've got, and it's great. It's obviously very different holding these kinds of sessions online, but we will try and make it as kind of interactive as we can. And also in doing that, I think, if you have questions, I think you can can you raise your hand on Zoom? Is there a function, Alex, that you can see if people have questions?
Yeah, people should be able to
or maybe write in the comments.
Maybe writing in the comments as
yeah.
well. Yeah.
We definitely, we'd welcome any questions you have, but also we have included some points during the presentation where we can discuss things. So hopefully you'll all get a chance to ask anything that you would like to. So let's get started. It's obviously me here today, and I'm an anthropologist in the ethnography team. I've also got my colleagues with me. Sophie, are you here?
Yes, hi everyone. Really pleased to be here. My background's also in cultural anthropology like Helle, and I'll talk a bit more about how I got to Ipsos later down the track.
Cool. Yeah. And we've got Deana as well, I think, hopefully.
Hiya, can you hear me when I speak?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can, okay. Cool.
Yeah. I can't see you though. Where are you?
Or maybe Sophie, you need to click a different grid.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I am also an anthropologist in the team. I actually studied at UCL, so I did my BSc in anthropology there. But yeah, I'll tell you more about that later on.
Cool. So I think just to start off, I wanted to ask you a bit of a question, more just to kind of get your heads into what it is that we do. So I wanted to ask if you have got, if you can explain to me what's happening in this picture. I don't know if a few people could just make a couple of comments.
Is that like is it like a, I can't really tell, is it like a Hoover or a hairdryer? Like, am I really totally off the mark there?
No, that is right. It is a vacuum cleaner, yeah, which is being used on a duvet on a bed, and it is from a project we did recently for Dyson. You probably know Dyson, but it is a big manufacturer of vacuum cleaners and hairdryers in the UK, and they're really particularly famous for their kind of high-end technology and sort of innovative designs. And I wanted to just include this picture because I think that when you come from, for example, if you're from England and that is your background, I don't think you would very often come across this picture, and you wouldn't think that people in other cultures might be vacuuming their duvets, because it's to us it looks really strange. But this is kind of the essence of what we do, and this is our job, is to kind of question these very mundane everyday behaviors that we see in people's homes. So we are doing what you all will know how to do, which is the interpretation of culture, but we are always doing it for businesses, and that's what we have to always have in mind. So although we are looking at many of the same things, the way that we talk about it and the way that we present these kind of cultural insights to our clients is really different. So for example, we are looking at what does it mean to be a premium consumer? So that means, having a really high income, for example. What does it mean to have, what does their home mean? What kind of rituals do they have around bedtime? What's the meaning of clean? And how do they use vacuum cleaners, in their everyday life? And so I think that these are all similar questions to what we might research in an academic arena. But when we come to present it to clients, we have to kind of bring it right down to a kind of everyday level. So I think that I wanted to ask this kind of rhetorical question, which is, what do you think are the biggest challenges when you have to start coming from academia and into something like market research? And I think all of us in our team at Ipsos, we can all agree that one of the first things that we have to learn, and one of the hardest things, is to talk about culture and explain culture in a way that's really simple and really kind of everyday simple language. I think that's one of the things that is the hardest for us to do. And it can be quite straightforward when we come from our kind of background, where we study anthropology, ethnography, other disciplines within academia, where we just are interested in culture. We have our own language around culture, and we know how to describe it in different ways. We might talk about kinship, or we might talk about customs, or all these kinds of different concepts. But actually, when it comes to our work, we have to know all of those things, but we have to kind of put them aside and talk about them in terms of maybe it's about marriage or motherhood, or maybe it's about cleaning at home. So it is taken down to its most mundane, basic level. So what I'm trying to say really is that culture is quite a slippery concept, and sometimes when we go and see clients and we talk to clients about culture, it can be quite hard for them to understand how things like local customs or heritage or food culture is going to be relevant and interesting for them, and why they should research culture. So what we really have to do is we have to find a way to connect cultural heritage to everyday behaviors and then apply it to business strategy for lots of different types of companies. And that is in very kind of crude terms what we have to do in our jobs. So for example, I wanted to give an example of what that could mean. So what we do is we look at, what we tell our clients mostly is that we look at shared meanings and learned behaviors. So we recently did a big project in China across smaller cities in China, and we were looking at the role of smell and fragrance, and it was for a big Parisian perfume house, and they wanted to understand what fragrance means. And they basically produce the fragrances that go into all of your shampoos or your fabric, your laundry conditioner, all that kind of stuff. But they didn't know anything about China, and they said to us, we don't know anything about Chinese people or Chinese culture. So what we have to do is we have to teach them some very basic stuff about Chinese culture. And so when we do that, we talk about shared meanings, which is quite often related to some very fundamental cultural values. And then we talk about learned behaviors, which is everyday routines. So just as an example for this project, all of the women that we met, they had very specific ideas about marriage and motherhood, and those were really important things to them to achieve in life. And then in terms of learned behaviors, what we found was that a lot of the women actually washed their hair upside down. And it comes from having lived or grown up, in houses where they didn't have access to a shower. But actually, a lot of people obviously do have access to a shower today, but they still have this behavior of washing their hair upside down, often when they're not in the shower. And you might be thinking, why is this actually relevant? But it is because one of the most important products or innovations that we helped this Parisian perfume house with was in their design of shampoo. And as you can see on this picture, is very different to if someone who stands upright and washes their hair. And this woman, she's got foam everywhere and she's got soap in her eyes, and the fragrance of the shampoo is all over her face. And this is something that we could never have learned by just asking her the question of how do you shower, how do you wash your hair? We simply have to be there and we have to see it happening. And that's just to kind of give you an idea about what is like the journey of our job in a way. So when we talk about cultural heritage, we might refer back to, this was actually traditional people did wash their hair like this. They are still doing it today. And that means that the way people experience shampoo is very different. Hopefully that makes sense. Have you got any questions? Otherwise, we're going to move on. So who are we? I'm going to hand over to Sophie to talk a little bit about who we are.
Hey everyone. Cool. So Helle, if you could. So this is our core team. So there's about 14 of us, I think. Unless my math is wrong on that. And basically we are experts in ethnography. So experts in a particular methodology in Ipsos Mori as a whole. So we kind of work across the company and will help in particular different cases, as well as doing our own projects. So in terms of background, we've all kind of got like a social science background. So a few of us are sociologists, anthropologists, a few of us have documentary filmmaking experience, and we had one semiotician who's recently left. But yeah, so that's our core team. But we also have a bunch of ethnographers that we work with who are freelancers, and they kind of do they do ethnography with us and for us sometimes. So they'll actually go into field, film people, talk to people, and then report back. So yeah, so it's basically us. I don't know, Helle or Deana, do you want to add anything?
No, it's all good.
Cool.
All good.
Cool. So I think I'll quickly like sum up how I got to this job, and yeah, what I like about working here. I hope you enjoy the picture of Anna Singh. She's like one of my answer heroes with mushrooms. I'm not sure if everyone's going to get that reference, but she wrote a book called The Mushroom at the End of the World, which I think is like a really good example of kind of anthropology coming into like a more public sphere and having more impact. So yeah, so basically I did a four-year degree in anthropology in Australia. And I got to the end of it feeling really confused about where to take this degree and like how to apply it. And I really wanted to work in anthropology, but I wasn't sure how. So I did a lot of research, which I recommend you do if you're looking into applied anthropology, because it is still quite a niche field. And then I worked in an Indigenous Land Council. So it's part of the government in Australia, and it kind of advocates for Indigenous rights and Indigenous land rights in particular. So I did a few months there, then worked in marketing and communications, and then realized that a lot of the agencies that I was interested in were based in the UK and the US, and were kind of really into visual methods. So I did a master's in visual and material anthropology at Oxford last year, and then just like all out applied and luckily got into this job. And I think I've just, generally speaking, just been really motivated by this idea that anthropology is just can add so much into so many different fields, and it has it can have a lot of really positive impact even in commercial contexts. So yeah, so I think that's been really great, and it's been really great working in a team like the one we're in, because we're able to be exposed to so much and kind of become experts in so much to some degree. And it's just the pace of the work is great, and you can actually see impact in real time. So yeah, so that's my run through of how I got here. I think I'll pass over to Deana now.
Hello. Okay, so I had a bit of a different path into this job to Sophie. So I did my BSc in anthropology at UCL, the best anthropological department you will ever be in. I'm very jealous that you're still there, and I'm not. I loved it. And I did a anthropology with a year abroad. So I was at UCLA for a year, very much in love with anthropology for those 4 years of my life. And then I graduated in 2017, and as Sophie said, I was as well a bit lost to how can I use all of this amazing knowledge that we were given and these amazing skills that we were giving to use in the way we think. How can I use that in the real world? Because I love academia, but I did want to kind of, as I said, use the anthropological skills we have gained outside of it. And once when I was talking to a really good dear friend of mine, he was also studying anthropology at that point, I was like, how do you explain anthropology to people? And I'm sure that a lot of people are like, what is anthropology actually? You know, they ask you. And he said to me that he usually says to people that anthropology is not a study of any given subject, but glasses that you use when you're studying any subject. And I thought it was so magical because, you know, you can study politics and economics and religion and kinship and biology and medicine, all of these different things, you can study them in an anthropological way. So then I kind of went away from anthropology and academia, and I started traveling around South America and realizing that I was actually really into film. And then I went back to London and I did an MA in Goldsmiths in film and screen studies. And I started freelancing in documentary film production. And I just thought, you know, that was kind of where I was going. But then after 8 months, I realized I really missed anthropology and I missed analyzing and kind of digging deeper into the content. So then I applied. One and only application for a 9-to-5 job was to this team. And I was like, if I don't get this, I'm just going to continue my documentary film production stuff. But I got it. So to go back to this little slide, which I haven't at all touched upon, is networks are the key. I would say don't be worried about kind of, as I'm sure you're not, because it doesn't really seem, it's not really an anthropological trait to be worried about going outside of the format. But, you know, don't be worried about experiences that might not like add anything to your CV, whatever idea you have of it, or whatever you think it has to look like. Don't worry about gaps in your CV, you know, just connect with as many different individuals and as many different projects as you want and as inspire you, because then as anthropologists, you will use anthropology in everything you do. So for example, I work as a part of the team now, but I also shoot my own films on the side, and all of them are always anthropological because it's just the way we all think. I also, Helle said that I should definitely mention the LinkedIn and networks. So the way that I've learned about this is through a girl that I also studied with at UCL, and I learned about it on LinkedIn. So I would really encourage everyone to be quite active there. Also DOTS, DOTS is a good one for as a more of a creative network as well. That's it.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I think we just wanted to give you a couple of examples of how you know, how we have kind of gotten into this, because it's not, there aren't that many jobs, and you know, we count ourselves very fortunate to have this kind of job, and I think that you know, we can go through it a little bit more towards the end, but I think we would also like you to kind of come out of here thinking that, you know, you understand how people get into this kind of thing, and you feel that you can contact us afterwards if you're interested in working with us. Anyway, we shall move on. So we normally are based in central London, near Tower Bridge. Not so much at the moment. So now we all just look like this on Zoom or Teams. It's been a little bit of a kind of, you know, changeover phase where we've had to go completely digital, but it's happened, and it's working, and obviously everybody else has had to go through the same thing. So that's not really new news anymore. But like Alex said right at the beginning, I just also wanted to say that Ipsos is a really, really big company, and it operates in 85 different countries around the world. I think Ipsos is mostly famous for its political polls, whether or not they are accurate. And I think that, you know, we are quite a small team in this enormous business, but I think we benefit massively from being a small team within this big organization, because we get lots of network kind of opportunities. We get lots of contacts. We have access to so much data, quantitative data as well. So it's a really good place to be, and Ipsos is a good place to work, actually. But just wanted to also show you our kind of show reel. It's a really short 3-minute video, and it gives a little overview of the kind of work that we have done in the past. It's not the same showing video on these online things, so it will probably be a bit slow on your side, but it should sort of give you an idea. If for some reason you can't hear the sound, can you just give me a little shout? Okay, hopefully that played for all of you. So what is actually business ethnography? I think we just wanted to start by going right back to the beginnings. Probably most of you are familiar with how ethnography was used by anthropologists many, many years ago. I mean, you may have heard of Malinowski, who did the anthropology in the Trobriand Islands, and he kind of obviously did it in a very different way, and it all looked very different, but actually we are trying to hold on to many of the principles that are used in anthropology and were used in anthropology, and so it looks a little bit different the way that we do it, but actually many of the principles are the same. And of course, because we do work in a commercial setting, we do not have the luxury of time most of the time, and we have to work to quite tight deadlines. But it is actually surprising, I think, how much depth you can still get to, even if you are spending much less time with people. But some of the key principles that we work to, and you know, how we would kind of define good ethnography in a business world, is that we spend a day with someone. So we tend to send a native speaking person out to spend the day with people, follow them around, and obviously film them. I will talk a little bit later about how we do that in this COVID world, but our principles remain the same. So we also have a kind of one-on-one relationship, and we try to build a lot of empathy into our interviewing, so that we can build rapport with people and get to know them. You know, we may have the best part of a day, but we still have to get to know people within that time frame. So we have to kind of build a close connection with them quite quickly. We also always make our interviews very participant-led. So it's not an interview where we come in with a guide and we sit down and ask questions. In fact, we don't come in with a questionnaire or a guide. We just come in with our camera, and we just kind of we learn what the things are that we need to understand, and then we do it in our own way. And we talk to people in a much more natural way than in kind of in sort of other market research methods, where it's probably more interview based or survey based. We also tend to use people who have some training in ethnography or anthropology, or you know, maybe people who are documentary filmmakers. And so we have a really big network of people who freelance for us, and typically people who have lots of different language skills, or kind of, or are based in particular cultures, all depending on where our research takes us. We end up with a lot of video data, and the reason why we film is, you know, simply to have all this data so that many more people can watch it and reanalyze it again and again. But of course, it is also so that we can share all of these things with our clients, and so that they can share the findings within their organizations. And video is an extremely powerful tool in the world of market research. And when we show videos to our clients and they have to make big decisions, you know, there is so much emotion in the videos, and you can't really recreate that same level of emotion in a report or in a PowerPoint. So that's why we use video. But I would also say, and this is a really important thing in terms of the way that we use video, we're not really a production company. So we're not looking for people who, you know, just kind of can make really good looking films. And so I would say to those people who you know, whose strength is not filmmaking but anthropology, we are always looking for people who are cultural thinkers and who can go in and find out the things that we need to find out and connect with people. And I think that being able to film is a secondary skill. That doesn't mean it's not important, but you know, we're not there to make production quality films. So video is very much part of our research method, and I think that's just a kind of an important thing to bear in mind. In market research, traditionally, people focus a lot on asking questions and listening to what other people are saying. So in focus groups or in other types of qualitative or quantitative research, you know, people will tend to go in with a questionnaire, or it will be a survey where we are only looking at what people will be saying to us. But, you know, we have learned from years and years of doing this that we do have to look at what people do. And we know that from anthropology, it's really important to be there and to follow people's behaviors. People don't always tell us exactly what they're doing, and it's not that they don't want to, and it's not that we're trying to catch them out, but we're always looking for the discrepancies between those two things, because people's aspirations and how they want to be is sometimes at odds with how they behave. And those are where our most important insights often are, and those are the things that are really hard for our clients to get to. Just wanted to give you a few examples. So this is from an Ipsos report from a different team that do surveys. And, you know, they would say, well, at Ipsos, we know about breakfast. We know what breakfast looks like. And they would say 80% of people agree with the statement. It's always nice when we have a family meal together. Nutella ties into this trend, bringing families back together for breakfast. So this was a project for Nutella. It was a big study. And this is, you know, the picture representing breakfast. But from all of our work, we know that actually breakfast more of the time looks a bit like this. It is someone standing up, someone's on their phone, another person's watching TV, you know, some people are maybe already on their way out. It's never really necessarily the ideal experience that we want it to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that everyday life is very different to the way that we sometimes would explain it. It's the same with retirement. We know from this report that working age people have many of the same aspirations. They would like frequent holidays and extensive travel. And, you know, they would like to walk down the beach wearing linen. But actually, what we might find in our research is that retirement can look more like this. It can be challenging. There are lots of things to overcome. There's loneliness, there's maybe illness. All of these things are a more kind of realistic reflection of daily life. And I think that the same goes for motherhood. This is also from the same report. And, you know, it says the essence of motherhood is that mothers, you know, want to see their children grow up every day, and it's kind of this magical moment. But actually, what we often see in our research with new mums, we've done quite a lot of research with new mums, and daily life can look a bit more like this. And I was there for this particular interview, and this woman's baby was crying non-stop, and she was so stressed, and she had 2 other children as well, and her whole day was just chaos. And I think that the reason why I'm showing you this is just to say that I think a lot of people and a lot of especially mothers as well are looking for brands that are a bit more realistic in their reflection of their life. You know, we might have aspirations to be the ideal mum, but we may not necessarily want to see this image which is not reflective of our daily life. And so I think, you know, one of the reasons why we try to do this and why companies come to us is because they want to see what real life looks like. And that's kind of those are some of the principles that we're trying to be true to. We have a case study from a project that Sophie has been doing for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So she's going to talk you through that now.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Helle. So we do, like Helle's explained, we do largely work with commercial clients, but occasionally we get to work with clients such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as other government agencies, and get to do some pretty cool projects. So I guess I just wanted to talk you through this because I think it's quite interesting in terms of the impact that we can have. You can go to the next slide, Helle. Thanks. So basically, I've worked on this project for about a year now, and we're basically looking at vaccine hesitancy in 3 different countries. So it's quite relevant to the current moment, probably unintentionally. So basically what was happening was that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was throwing money and resources behind well-intentioned but not effective health interventions to try and get people in Nigeria, Uganda, and Guinea to vaccinate their kids. And it just wasn't working because, like a lot of non-governmental and government health interventions, they weren't really taking an anthropological approach. They weren't looking at the sociocultural context in which people live and how this plays into people's opinions and trust around vaccines. So we were kind of brought in to come up with a bunch of core themes that related to people's day-to-day lives and broader cultures, and think about interventions that were designed with particular regions and with particular people in mind. So they were actually designed with people in mind rather than just kind of like broad interventions that were applied to, whole regions and, many different countries with the same approach. And yeah, these will feed into new interventions that will be used. So if you can go to the next slide, Helle. So I wanted to share a film with you, but unfortunately we can't due to GDPR reasons. But I'll just talk you through one of the themes that we've come up with during our Nigeria fieldwork. So basically, I think when we think about vaccinations and why people want to get vaccinated, we often think about trust and who people trust and why they don't trust certain people and certain groups of people, and how vaccines kind of tie into people's feelings about government and more generally. So I think in Nigeria, we really found that a lot of people were mentioning just generally distrust, and that came up a lot. And our participants really talked about how they couldn't trust their neighbors, they couldn't trust strangers, they couldn't trust healthcare workers, people from the government, and sometimes they couldn't even trust their own families. So there was this, we kind of termed it an environment of distrust. And this, we found through talking to people that this kind of stemmed from this cultural notion of this discontinuity between your public face, so what you're saying on the outside and how you're interacting with people, and your private face, so like your internal self and your internal intentions and motivations. So there was all this like concern about what people really wanted and what their true intentions were, and not being able to understand that, and therefore not being able to trust them really. So, but there were some exceptions. So people were really, had this kind of like implicit faith in God, and then by extension, religious leaders, and also elders, because elders were believed to have this kind of like built up knowledge and experience and have no real motivation or desire to kind of harm others or lie to them. So yeah, so that's kind of looking at trust in Nigeria during our fieldwork. And I know we haven't got a video for you, and I've kind of like offloaded all of this information, but I was wondering if you could perhaps like think about maybe in the chat or feel free to speak, how we could go about designing interventions based on this idea of trust and distrust in Nigeria. And, even if it's just like a simple thing about who we choose to advocate for vaccines in a particular community based on this.
Feel free to use the chat as well if you want to put something forward.
Maybe I could say something just from the brief description you've given. Perhaps the elders actually could be the most trusting actors that you could use if you're facing a society that lacks the trust needed. Then the elders could be great actors, perhaps, to use and to make them explain, of course, only if they're convinced, why this is good for their society and why this is only something that will help the entire community, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that's something that we've also fed back to the foundation as well, because elders are just implicitly trusted, and there is this kind of sharing of knowledge that happens naturally within a family. So to bring elderly people in a community on board is really important. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Ellie. I just saw your comment. Yeah, I think religion really came into it because God was kind of seen as like a protective force, so sometimes conflicted with vaccines. So yeah, it's really important to look at religious reasons. But Helle, did you want to move on?
I can't see the comments, so if you have more comments, feel free to incorporate them.
Just to say also very quickly, this is super topical right now, obviously, as Sophie kind of touches on, like, you know, Gallup poll done in August of this year in the States, it finds that 35% of American citizens would not take a free FDA-approved COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you think that to achieve kind of immunity levels that are necessary across community, you need around 60%. And of course, each vaccine only has a certain effectiveness rate. You know, you can see how, like, obviously, like addressing these kinds of questions is really at the forefront, you know, of like public health questions worldwide. You know, perhaps another thing is also the kind of the technical delivery mechanism. You know, the syringe. People are frightened of syringes.
Yeah.
And I know that, you know, big pharmaceutical companies are now working on a kind of oral delivery for vaccines, for example, which doesn't have the same connotation as you know, no one likes a syringe. I mean, yeah, I'll be honest.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Alex. I think we realized when we were doing the ethnography, because we've all forgotten like what it was like as kids, because obviously we were quite young, most of us, when we got vaccines. But just seeing a baby get injected with a needle this big, and a lot of the time they have really negative side effects afterwards. So they'll have a temperature, and there's no explanation as to why. So it actually makes a lot of sense why people are suspicious and yeah, uncomfortable with it. But there's also a great website called a project headed up by Dr. Heidi Larson, who's an anthropologist, called the Vaccine Confidence Projects, that I would recommend you guys look at if you haven't already. It's really interesting looking at how anthropology can be used in the public health sphere.
Yeah, I think it will be quite a big topic certainly at Ipsos as well for the next foreseeable future, as all of this vaccine news become more kind of real. But we have done a little bit of work as well on people's perceptions of the vaccine, and like Alex said, actually there was a lot of people who were really against it and simply wouldn't trust it for various reasons. So yeah, it's a really anthropological topic. But like Sophie was just saying as well, we the Gates work that we do is super fascinating, and it feels so anthropological. But it is also not necessarily the bulk of our work. But you know, we do still get to have these kind of public health projects come up sometimes. But just to move us along a bit, I wanted to give you a different case study, which is a little bit more commercial in nature. And it's a project we've been doing in Korea for Dyson. And Dyson wanted to understand South Korean culture. They didn't know anything about it. But actually, South Korea is one of their biggest markets for their vacuum cleaners, and they didn't know anything, and they didn't really know why they were so successful there. And I think that, you know, there are different types of research that we do, and there's different times at which anthropology and ethnography is useful. But when clients come to us and say, we don't know anything about this culture, anthropology can be really good and ethnography is great, because we can kind of go right back to basics and explain culture at a kind of almost stereotypical level. So, you know, like if you were going to, like, for example, at work, I always get told that, you know, I always get teased because I'm a Dane, and people always say that, you know, I'm the one that does all the hygge and all sorts of other things, and those are kind of the stereotypical ways of describing culture. And although there's a lot of other elements to culture and a lot more nuance, I think sometimes when we do have to kind of go back to basics, it's actually quite interesting. We have a lot of potential for educating our clients who don't know anything about culture, and I think that those projects can be quite interesting. So we call them foundational pieces of research. Automation is huge, yeah, but actually at the same time, hard work was just really valued, and being able to use like manual force and manual power to clean the floor, for example, was something that everybody did. So they all had multiple vacuum cleaners, automatic and handheld and cordless, but they still washed their floor with their hands on their knees, all of them. And I think it was really fascinating to see how the technology was so important, but so was the manual work. We hadn't really seen that in another country. And I think for a technology company like Dyson, seeing that on a video is really, really valuable, because they didn't know that the floor was that important. They didn't know people use the floor. And I think, you know, when we think about the fact that Dyson is a company that designs vacuum cleaners, you know, we ask ourselves, how could they not know that almost? But they don't. You know, they are designing products, quite often global products, so they don't necessarily you know, nuance them, and they are designing communications globally. But I think that over the last few years, because of the work that we've done, I think, you know, they've realized that they do have to have some elements of local culture in their products and in their communications, because cultures are so different, and the way that people think of cleanliness, the way they think of convenience, and like you say, work, and all of those things is just very different from context to context. And those are the some of the elements that we look at. And that, for example, you can see on the picture here, this was one of our participants. He was wrapping potatoes to go in the fridge, but he was sitting on the floor doing it, and that was really normal for him. He would do that every day. And these kinds of scenarios, the mother sitting on the floor, they would all have these mats on the floor as well, so that they could play and just lie around. And they would fold laundry. They would pour all their clean laundry out on the floor, so that the floor had to be extremely clean. I'm just sharing you these things because the fact that the floor is an important part of their culture is a really old thing, of course. But actually, the fact that people are still today using it like that and doing it has really big implications for product design. And these are some of the ways in which, you know, we can help companies by looking at these very kind of foundational cultural elements. But of course, the pandemic got a little bit in the way of our work. So we did have to spend some time going digital. And I think Deana is just going to talk through some of our changes. We've kept the same principles, but we have obviously changed our methodology a bit, because we can no longer go into people's homes. So we have to rely on our participants to show us everything.
Yes. So Excellent. Okay, so pandemic obviously for everyone was a bummer. We were like, how are we going to continue having a job, seeing that everything was face-to-face? But our team is quite innovative, and we came up with quite a fast solution, which we're still working through, and we're still learning. On every new project we learn something else. So basically we are at the moment using an application. So it's an online platform which our participants use. So instead of us going to their houses, spending a day with them and filming them, what we do now is we spend 1 to 2 weeks, really depends on a project, online with them in the online space. So it actually gives us more time during which we establish a relationship and send us videos of their everyday life. So we usually start our fieldwork with an introduction interview. So it's a Teams interview with a video. We get them to show us their house. We also show them our house, because obviously not all parts of your house are perfect. So you want to show them that you're a human as well. And we start building that rapport. We usually work with freelancers for this part of the project, because unfortunately we don't have enough people on our team to do this, even though it's the funnest bit. So after we have recruited our participants, we brief our freelancers on the objectives of the project. And sorry, my internet connection is a bit unstable, so if I drop off, just so you know. Basically, we then brief our freelancers, we introduce them to the project, we explain the objectives, we explain the approach, we take them through the discussion guide, and then our moderators are the ones who are in direct contact with our participants. So they first teach them how to film. We explain the importance of B-roll, so we want a lot of observational footage as well, and then we spend the 2 weeks with them and getting to know them and their lives and digging deeper into whatever topic we're at that point researching. And then, so after the online videos, the online video diary, we usually also have a wrap-up interview in which we kind of, at the beginning we didn't start with it, but you know, people do need kind of a closure, you know, thank you message. And also in the wrap-up interview, it gives us an opportunity to dig deeper into any of the objectives that any of the questions the clients might have thought of throughout the research. So after we have done all the fieldwork, we then dig deeper into the footage. So we either watch the footage ourselves. For example, during the pandemic, I started working as an in-team editor. So at some projects, I'm lucky enough to be the editor. So I get to watch the footage, I get to really engage with the data, and I get to edit the documentaries myself. Sometimes it is the moderators and the editors who do it for us, but we're obviously collaborating with them really closely. And at that point, we then bring the clients in and we review the documentaries and the films that we have done with them, feeding them what we have found and presenting our findings. Helen, you could go to the next slide. I don't know if I have said everything or...
Yeah. Do you want to tell them a little bit about COVID Watch?
Yes, yeah. So these are very familiar faces. So basically in March, most of our projects came to a halt. I was, for example, supposed to be flying to Brazil in 5 days, and that didn't happen. And you know, obviously it was very, very sad. But okay, I have, my heart has mended since. And then all of the projects had come to a halt, and we were quite, you know, what are we going to do with our team? I mean, will the team survive if we don't adapt to this new situation? So then we were very proactive about that project, and we created this COVID Watch project, because we said, like, you know, this is the moment through which we need to follow people and consumers and understand how are their habits and routines changing, and also whether those new ways of being will stay with us, or is it just a temporary change, and will everything go back to normal, or what it was before the pandemic. So this COVID Watch is our digital ethnography study, which has been running since April. We are all quite proud of it because it has been really a team effort. So every single one of us was involved. Some of us learned how to edit super quickly. Some of us got amazing, you know, improved their like analytical skills and started writing some amazing reports that went through our clients. And we have covered 6 markets and 30 families. And for me, looking at these faces of these people, I have spent 6 months with them, and I know them quite well. And it was a very fun, a very interesting project to work on, to be quite engrossed into whatever was happening back then.
Do you have any questions or thoughts on this film or any of the other stuff that we've shown you or talked about today? Then please do shout.
I think, Helle, we've got a couple of questions that a few of them we can save to the end, but there are some to do with the digital ethno method that maybe we can answer now.
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah, so I think from what I've seen here, so Lisa asked about, with people used to showing their best sides in social media, like how do we trust them to show us their real life and how we get them to do that?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a really good question, and I think it is something that, you know, we have to continue to work with. And obviously when we are in people's homes, we have the same issue, but we know that people can't really keep up the facades for a whole day, and so maybe for the first hour or the first 2 hours they can tell us, you know, things that are maybe a bit different than they actually are. But after a whole day of spending time with them, I think that all of those kind of boundaries eventually break down. But you're right on, when we're asking them to film, it is different. But we do have most of the time a 2-week window. And we set people video tasks every day. And as soon as they've done a task, or our moderators are monitoring the task, and they can go back to them and say, what is it you're doing here? Can you explain that to me? And I think that, again, after this time and during that time, we have actual online interviews. So I think that we are always trying to create connections that mean that people will show us who they are. There's another element to our research, which is that right at the beginning, when we ask them to send us videos, we will also do a video of ourselves to send to them. And I think that it establishes a kind of connection where, you know, if I do a video around my house, you know, they'll see that I've got a really messy kitchen, or that, you know, that there are things that aren't quite as, you know, maybe I would like them to be. And so I think that as soon as you show them that bit of yourself, I think they become more willing to show their lives as well. But you know, it is something that we can't fully overcome, and there will always be a bit of a bias. That's how it is.
Yeah, and I think we don't ever pretend to be objective, and I don't think that's
No.
I don't think us as anthropologists, if I can speak for us as a collective group, really pretend that objectivity is a thing that really exists. There's always going to be a bias, and there's always going to be subjectivity in our method. There's another question about audio methods with participants, so whether we use them. And I think Generally, we don't. We typically rely on film, but in places where it's hard to film, we do use audio recordings and conversation recordings where we're allowed to. So, for example, in clinics with doctors in South Africa, we used audio recordings and relied on ethnographers taking field notes and photographs because it wasn't safe to film there for them.
So there's a couple of other questions here. Like Robin asks, how much of your time is spent doing ethnography and what does the rest of your job entail? And there's also kind of a question from Sophie, which is, how do you select your participants?
Okay, I think the first question is a great question, because I guess in some way, you know, we end up looking at being and doing ethnography as our only job. So there are lots of different parts to ethnography. Some of it is project management, and that is running big research projects, you know, on a global scale, and that involves a lot of logistics. So I think, you know, in our team, we don't really separate it out. We don't have particular people doing only project management. We all do everything, and so the ethnography is one long process. There's a setup phase, you know, there's a research phase, an analysis phase, and a reporting phase. But I think that the fact that we are all part of all of it makes it much easier for us to work on it and to see the kind of whole process of it. So it's hard for me to say how much time do we spend doing ethnography and not, because I think it's all connected to each other, if that makes sense.
I would like to add something.
Yes.
I agree with what Helle said, but I also would like to add that at different parts of the project, there would be less or more ethnography involved. So when you're doing, someone asked, how do you select your participants? So we work with recruiters usually, who then find participants that they think might be good for the study and then send us their details. We usually interview them and see whether we think they would be good they have a good screen presence, they film well, and they also would be good for the project objectives. They're kind of three things that we think about. Yeah. But in that kind of a setup, there would be less ethnography, which I assume what you were thinking about, kind of more like analysis and deep diving into the data. And then the second part of the project, which is after the field work. So when the editing is done, when the analysis is done, when you're creating your presentation, the final presentation, that is kind of when we really do the fun ethnographic part.
I think that Deana is right. I would say though that in the setup phase, we are always thinking about what is our end result going to be, and what are we trying to achieve and find out. And so even when we are putting people on the ground and we're designing all the materials for fieldwork, that feels ethnographic, because we have to already then be thinking about what do we want to see, what are we going to get these people to look at when they're in rural Nigeria or when they're in Shanghai in China, and we have to try and imagine all these different scenarios. And I think for me that feels very ethnographic, because it's all the preparation as well. And of course we have to get this part right, because if we don't get this part right, then it's no use us sending people off to all these different countries, because we won't be able to tell them what to do. So I think you're right. I think the ethnography part, of course, is that, you know, we are doing the analysis, and the field work and the reporting feels more ethnographic. But I would also emphasize that I think it's really important to look at this in a kind of holistic way, because if we don't get the right setup and the right people, etc., we won't get very good results. And I think it's the same if you work in academia. You have to get your project set up right, and all of that is part of the same process, I think.
Mm-hmm. And Simon also had a question, like, when working digitally, do you use local third parties to maintain or build relationships and trust, or is it all direct? So this is kind of in this new kind of COVID phase, I imagine, of your work.
When you say third parties.
I mean,
what do you mean?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, are you doing it directly yourselves from wherever base you are when you're dealing with Nigeria? Are you in London or Denmark or wherever, or are you using local facilitators to if you use local people to recruit your participants, do they have an active role in maintaining and building the relationship that you've got with the participants, or is it your relationship?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we tend to work with freelancers, so people who are ethnographers and anthropologists and researchers, and they tend to be the ones that we send out to fieldwork, and they get to meet the participants and connect with them. In this digital world, it's a little bit of a mix. So we may have someone who's based in Nigeria, but depending on what the situation is in the country, there are some countries where we can still do face-to-face, but when we can't, we will have a local native speaking person, but they don't necessarily have to be in Nigeria if everything is online anyway. But we are the core team, and we don't necessarily do all of the interviews and the researching. That's where we use ethnographers or people like yourselves who are part of our freelance network.
If I could actually ask a question, so the kind of the presence of video is really striking, and maybe that is something that might be a little bit different for undergrads and postgrads at UCL Anthropology to see how you use anthropology, right? Because for us, our output is always text-based. It's always text-based. And right from the start, we're like, okay, you need to write like this, you need to do this, da, 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 da. It's always text. So almost all the examples you've used here are video-based. So can you tell us, why aren't you producing texts? Like, what is it about video that is really useful for you? And what is the logic behind that? So people might be able to get a bit of an insight into this, gap between text and video.
Yeah, that's a good question and a good point. And I would also say I didn't study visual anthropology, and I didn't study video, and I can't edit and I can't make films. So it's not that you have to have done that or be brilliant at that. I think it's a way of thinking, and we do produce texts. We write reports for all of our projects, and I think that's a good point. And I think Sophie was also going to briefly talk about the Cultural Insight Network, because this also comes a bit into that, because we also produce papers in conjunction with academics around the world. But yes, I mean, the reason why we rely so heavily on film is because a lot of our clients, they always want to see the behavior, and they have very, very short attention spans. And I think most of our clients probably don't read our entire reports, but someone in that organization will, and we do produce the reports for that reason. But the material that makes it into the boardroom, and the material that is used to make important decisions, they are usually the films, and it is the reactions to the films that give us, repeat work, and people that contact us and go, oh, I've watched this film, I've seen this. But of course, the films don't just happen without the analysis and without the reporting. So the films are illustrating what we write in our reports, and the reports are the kind of the summary of all of our findings. So we do write reports, and text is important.
Oh, thanks for that. Do we have other questions? Does anyone else kind of have another response? I
think we've got a few more, but I think, Helle, do we have a few more slides as well?
We have a few more slides.
I think we might have jumped the gun on the questions.
We could just run quickly through our. You could just briefly go through our Cultural Insight Network, Sophie.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about the last questions.
Yeah, so I'll just talk about this slide. I won't go into the case study because we're running out of time. But basically, I think we just wanted to talk to you about the Cultural Insight Network, which is basically a network of academics that we draw upon. So anthropologists, sociologists in various different universities that have expertise in a particular country or region. And obviously we're experts in ethnography and our methodology, but you know, we don't have expertise across cultures, and we would never claim to. So we often need academics to give us that cultural grounding, because, you know, we're doing research really quickly. We have a small sample size, and we don't want to essentialize and generalize. We want to get away from that usually. So we ask academics who are experts in a particular area to write us a paper that we then translate into a report, either for our own purposes, so to inform discussion guides as well as to direct research, but also for clients who don't want to do kind of face-to-face or digital research yet, and just want to have like an understanding of the region that they want to expand into, or the people that they want to reach out to. So yeah, that's a quick summary of the Cultural Insight Network. And maybe a few of you who are PhDs on this call, on the Zoom rather, might be interested in this. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you're interested in working with us on this.
Yeah. Are there any more questions on the that I can't see?
I think there are quite a few.
Alex, are we okay for time, or are we? What time are we?
Yeah, we're good. Like,
okay.
Yeah, like we should address the questions. Definitely, it's good.
There is a question from Yasmin. Sorry if I pronounced that not well. I apologize. They say, if my study isn't related to ethnography or anthropology, what skills should I get other than getting a master's degree to work in market research and in business ethnography?
What course should you do, or what was that?
Yeah, what
skills should they get?
Yeah.
What skills?
I think we have a few people on our team that have just come from marketing backgrounds.
We do.
So I think we're not. It's not like we're closed to only anthropologists and people with social science backgrounds. We do tend to preference that, because that's kind of like our core offering, I guess, in the business. But marketing is also really important as a skill set.
And it's also like the ability to be interested in culture and to be able to connect with people. I think those are the skills that we value more than anything else. And you don't necessarily need a degree in anthropology for those things. But you do get a good grounding in anthropology. But yeah, you don't have to.
Yeah,
that's definitely.
And film as well. We do recruit filmmakers.
We do recruit filmmakers.
Yeah.
But those skills are kind of are easier to be learned while you're working, editing and filming. Also, just general good skills, always a foreign language. If you know one, perfect. We're always on the look for people who speak languages.
There's a really interesting question from Stian, which is asking about the difficulties of the COVID Watch project. You know, as a researcher, obviously this is done remotely, but you know, more sort of generally perhaps, and it's something that also academic anthropologists are beginning to address now, belatedly, should have been addressed a long time ago, which is, you know, what is the kind of the mental toll of, you know, doing field work, and how do you address that at Ipsos? You know, this is something that has really only come, is of ever more concern, shall we say, like in academic circles.
Yeah. And I think it was really, you know, we don't necessarily do these longitudinal studies very often. We do quite fast turnaround projects that usually last about 3 months, but this has lasted for a long time. And I think it's a good question, because we, you know, we couldn't use any freelancers at all for this project. So everything was done in our core team. And everybody was dealing with their own crisis, their own coronavirus crisis, and also handling all these participants at the same time going through the same crisis. But in a way it was almost therapeutic as well, because it was just so nice to connect with people around the world who were going through the same thing. so I think in a way, even though it meant that all of our lives was just about COVID the whole time, because if we weren't working, studying COVID, we were at home trying to understand what COVID meant for us. And in a way, it just, yeah, I think most days it was helpful, and it was nice, just to have a lifeline, you know, to talk to people. And then, but yeah, I think it's a good question. I don't know what the mental toll really is, to some of our ethnographers and freelancers, but it is really hard work. Is it something you have experience of yourself, or in academia, is it something you talk about? Or
I think, you know, for a long time, anthropology was, you know, quite a sort of patriarchal discipline. And what came along with that were, you know, connotations of going out, doing your field work, getting through it, being tough, not complaining. The whole idea of doing doctoral field work is that you sort of have to do 12 months, 18 months of field work. And, you know, you're not a proper anthropologist until you've gone through that.
right.
And I think that's been increasingly kind of put into question. Ethics processes around the country have really tightened up. And I think there's a growing recognition, you know, especially in, you know, PhD field work, as you say, Helle, like more longitudinal work, that, yeah, like actually there's a duty of care, like beyond just an academic kind of, you know, hit the marks, whatever.
Yeah.
You know, you actually have to really, you know, field work, it can be really tough and really isolating. And often you go somewhere where you don't have much support network. So
that's really true, yeah. And I think it's also very relevant as a conversation for when we actually do send people to other countries, because we are asking individuals to go into someone's home, and we've never met, you know, these people. We don't know where they live. We don't necessarily know the area. And so we do spend quite a lot of time making sure that the recruitment companies that we work with do understand the areas that we're sending people into. And we set up WhatsApp groups as well, so that we're always in contact with our ethnographers. But this is also fairly recent that we've started doing that, because even though we only maybe send people off for a week, it's still a long time when you're working almost, you know, I don't know, 15 hours a day doing interviews and notes and video. Yeah.
I think Victoria's got a question about academic backgrounds when looking at vaccine hesitancy. So not just having a background in social cultural anthropology, but also medical. And yes, I agree. We've got a few of our colleagues have backgrounds in medical anthropology, and it's very useful, I think. As well as that we work with the global health team who are specialists in global health. So they all have degrees in public health as well. So yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for that great session. I think it's been really helpful. I think you've really kind of gone through and kind of showed us, you know, what it is you do on a day-to-day basis, the different modalities of work, how you've coped, you know, in a dynamic way, or should I say pivoted, you know, the COVID, you know, sort of pandemic. And it's just really helpful to kind of get a different idea of how anthropology is useful and insightful to companies and employers, you know, around the world. It's very much part of what we're trying to do with this Anthropology in the Professional World, you know, series, just kind of show how beyond that, the academy, you know, how anthropology is put to use. And next week, so yeah, this time next week, we'll have another session from an artist, Turner Prize nominated artist, Monster Chetwynd. She actually studied at UCL. She did anthropology at UCL in the mid-90s, and then studied at Slade School of Art, and, you know, all the way to the Turner Prize nomination. And she's going to talk about how anthropology kind of contributes to her creative process, and how there are some key anthropological texts that have actually informed some of her artwork.
Cool.
Nice.
So, you know, that kind of diversity, actually, I really liked what you said, Deana, like the idea of anthropology being like a glasses or a lens, you know, with which to kind of throw into focus like different fields of endeavor. It kind of gives us this kind of nice overview. So it's just, to me, to just say thank you very much to Helle, to Deana, and to Sophie for a really great presentation. Thank you all for being part of the session, for contributing, for throwing out some really, really interesting questions. You push these guys, you push them to the max.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been really good.
Yeah,
So
thanks so much.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. It has been great.
Thank you.
You.
Bye.